mentioned how we can use this as an opportunity to spiritually fulfill ourselves, but also to become mentally resilient. And I just wanted to bring another issue to your attention. We, as imams in the UK, are receiving lots of calls from sisters who are saying that now husbands are staying at home, and there are issues at home because perhaps couples haven't had the opportunity to live together, and coronavirus has forced people to live together, and that's resulting in domestic abuse, emotional stress, and as well as perhaps on occasions I have had to deal with like talaq issues as well. Now, where would you go when you are actually confined to your home? So what advice would you give to the Muslim community regarding, not just in respect of this period, but overall?
Sure. I mean, first of all, domestic violence is haram in Islam. To beat a woman is haram. The verse in Surah An-Nisa, verse 34, that the verse in there is very clear in the commentaries. It's very clear that has nothing to do with violence. That any physical act of violence against a woman, or don't forget, women actually are also abusive. About close to 30% of all domestic violence in America is women actually against men. So men are also abused physically, and a lot of men, and I'm one of them, because I've never hit a woman, and like I grew up learning that you do not hit women, and so there are men who actually will be their wife or their spouse or whoever will get violent with them, and they won't fight back. And ER doctors know this because they've seen men who come to ER with boiling water had been poured on them when they were sleeping or something like that because of some of these domestic disputes. So it's not just the women, but the majority, undeniably, the majority of around 66% in the U.S. I don't know what the stats are in UK, are women. So the majority of victims of domestic violence are women, and unfortunately, even murders that are spousal, they're usually perpetrated the man against the woman. So this is a human problem. It's been a problem for a very, very long time. What people should fear God and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is over them. And even in the verse in Surah An-Nisa, it reminds people that Allah is over them immediately after that, for that very reason. So, I just, no woman should feel insecure in her home. No woman should have that feeling. The house in Arabic, the word in Arabic is maskan, which is the place of sakina. And the Quran, when it talks about in Surah Ar-Rum, when it talks about the reason why God created the man and the woman, one of the reasons was litaskunu ilayha, that you find tranquility in your spouse. And so there should be sakina in the home. And if there's not, that home is not practicing the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know that the Prophet never raised his hand to hit a woman, a child, or a servant, and that's in the hadith. So the sunnah of the Prophet is never to raise his hand against a woman, a child, or a servant. And if you're doing that, you're not following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So I would just remind people of that. I mean, one of the interesting verses in the Quran in Surah Maryam, where Mary, when the Annunciation happens and she sees the angels, she seeks refuge in Allah, and then she says, in kunta taqiyya, if you have taqwa. I mean, when you're in a situation like if the person has an ounce of piety in their heart and that woman reminds them, that should be something that stops them from doing that. But women have a right to be safe and secure in their homes. And I would just add to this, and this is a very important component, understand that your husbands right now are probably in there's anxiety, there's concern about, you know, their jobs, where they're going. These are all real, and they create an immense amount of mental stress. And so it's very important that a woman understand that, especially if she's being provided for generally by that husband. I mean, sometimes both spouses are working, and that's a very different situation. But when the husband is the main provider for the household, it's very important that the woman really help him in that as his partner, and just be a source of solace for him. And because some relationships, you can have, unfortunately, people that are always complaining, or they just goad the person, or they push buttons, you know, as they say in modern parlance, you know. And some spouses, whether it's male or what push to get a certain reaction from the husband or the wife. So, oh, you're just like your mother, or oh, you're just like your father. And then that just sets them off. And so it's very important that we get out of, these are called the games people play. You know, it was a book back in the 60s about that. These kind of, R.D. Laing wrote a book called Knots, you know, about the psychological knots that people get wrapped up in. We have to break these patterns. We're human beings, we're intellectual and spiritual beings, and we have the capacity to break patterns. And this is very important. And I'll just give you one example from my own life to drive this home. Years ago, you know, I had one of my sons was very slow, and it was hard to get him out, and we had karate lessons, you know, and so they had to go, and it was actually Taekwondo, but he was late, and I got upset with him, and I really let him have it, not physically, but, and I looked at him, and I saw myself with one of my own caregivers when I was younger. And I realized that I was doing, it was the tapes of my youth being replayed on him. And I literally drove back home and just told him, we're going to start over. And I did it differently. So I broke that tape. And so these are things that people can do. Very often domestic violence comes out of people who grew up in houses that had domestic violence. And so they're repeating the patterns of the past. And the important thing to note is that if you're a believer, then you have to recognize that mujahada is fighting the impulses of the negative impulses of yourself. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That if you struggle, this mujahada, if you struggle, God will guide you. But if you're not struggling with yourself, and so if somebody, you know, if you get into a situation, you have to immediately stop yourself, or take some breaths, or just do certain things. The Prophet ﷺ, he would always go to prayer. So that's something you do. If you're feeling really angry, I guarantee you, if you go and do wudu and you pray 2 rakats, it's going to have a major impact on your mental state, and it will subside. But you have to do these things. They're difficult things to do, but they are things that the human being is more than capable of doing. But this is mujahada.